Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov, Rosh Chodesh Av, Menachem Av. This week we're starting the final book of the 5 books of Moshe Rabbeinu, the 5 books of the Torah, Sefer Devarim, and the first parsha is Parashat Devarim. So it's the culmination of the Torah now. Also, we're in a special time of the year, the 9 days, the pinnacle of when we mourn the destruction of our temple and the exile of our people every year, up to Tisha B'Av, starting today. So today is still a happy day, Rosh Chodesh, but it's Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av, the beginning of the 9 days. In this portion, again, the beginning of the end of the Torah. So it's a special book, a unique book that's narrated by Moshe Rabbeinu himself. I mean, all the other books are in third person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling the story. But this book is Moshe Rabbeinu's highest prophecy, where he narrates the end of the Torah itself. And most of the book, as most of us are probably familiar, is actually the storytelling of everything that we've gone through from Moshe Rabbeinu's point of view, from his perspective, all of the turmoil in the Midbar. But more than anything else, what we'll focus on now is just we're entering the culmination of the Torah itself. And also, by divine providence, every year, this is always the parasha that we read in the midst of the 9 days. Parashat Chazon, the Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat that precedes Tisha B'Av. So again, in a sense, or at least superficially, this is a harsh time. It's a hard time of the year. Now, the Ishbitz's Vort that we're focusing on this week also focuses on that part of the Torah, where the Torah itself, he says in his words, again, he quotes from Chazal, is that the Torah itself has not a harshness, but it has something of it that it's like a whip, like an educational whip. And there's, in the process of growth or of teaching, so there's always an element of reprimanding, of disciplining. And there has to be a certain a harsh side to it. So not always is it a physical whip, but there's a side of training and advancements where a person has to be harsh with himself. He has to be, again, he needs to pivot up against himself. And you can't just stretch someone. You have to also give a certain pivot up against him in order to maneuver him away from where he shouldn't be going. So every process of growth has that. And the Torah, the Chazal teach us, is the best whip. Again, the best whip you can get, the best harshness you can get, the sweetest harshness is the Torah itself. And we'll explain that again. What is this? How does he contemplate on this concept? So the word he's saying, I mean, in the process of spiritual growth, so you can find throughout the ages several different approaches to this. I mean, the idea that a person needs to have a critical eye on himself, whether the person's first nature, his first opinion of himself is delusion and needs to be criticized and reassessed. So that's nothing new. Now, the way this was gone about throughout the ages is that you can see, anybody who's familiar with the text, Jewish text, and also another other spiritual paths, is that there's a lot of where a person practices a lot of self-inflicted, I wouldn't say punishment, but self-inflicted. What's the word for it? Lifrosh in Hebrew, you say, where a person you criticize and scrutinize yourself a lot physically. So you don't eat much, you don't sleep much. Even you might practice in self-inflicted pain, like a person fasting, or even more than fasting. There were customs of walking around with shoes with no soles on the bottom in order to feel the physical pain. Now, what's the idea, the logic behind all of this? Is that we'll quote the Zohar. I mean, a very famous quotation from the Zohar, the famous book of Kabbalah. The Zohar says, "Chulsha de gufa tukpa de nishmeta, tukpa de gufa chulsha de nishmeta." That when a person has the strength of the body, like the sensation of being full of oneself, in simple terms, so it weakens the soul. And the weakening of the body strengthens the soul. That's what that quotation says. Chulsha de gufa, tukpa de nishmeta. The weakening of the body enhances, strengthens the soul. And the strengthening of the body, it weakens the soul. So why is that the case? I mean, we're all familiar with the famous Rambam that says that you need to have a healthy soul and a healthy body. Okay, but the Zohar says seemingly the exact opposite. Now, what the Zohar quotes, so that's a known sensation. I mean, experientially, we're all familiar with that when a person is physically full of himself, like, so if you just had a big meal or something, or and you have no problems in life. Okay, so you're very, again, like the phrase says, you become full of yourself. You feel like you don't need anything from anyone. And a person is lacking even the most elementary physical lackings, like we're about to fast on Tisha B'Av. So what is a fast all about? I mean, that's maybe the simplest example of this approach or this attitude in the service of Hashem. Why do we fast? Because when a person fasts, so he exposes himself to his meekness, to his neediness, to how you skip 2 meals and already you feel like a shmata, like a rag, because that's what we are. We're captivated in our needs and bodies, and we're a very needy creature. But as long as we can continue or keep up the upkeep of constantly soothing every lacking, so we might be oblivious and able to ignore the existential neediness of our existence, how meek and fragile our existence is. But if you skip a meal, so it exposes you to your fragility, to how fragile you are, to how meek and weak you are. Because that's, again, simply the concept behind fasting. And when a person fasts, it exposes his lowliness. On the other hand, when you eat a lot or you subdue every lacking, the second you're hungry, immediately you put a cork on that, so you put something in so that you don't ever feel your hunger. And hunger as an allegory, but also hunger as a very physical sensation that expresses to a person his need for constant upkeep, for constant again, caring, because he's so fragile. Okay, so if you never allow yourself to feel these sensations in life, never allow yourself to feel a lacking, so you become full of yourself, and that seals your heart to turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to feeling Hashem's presence in your life. You lack the elementary sensation of needing Hashem. You don't need anything. You don't feel like, I don't need anything from anyone because I'm full of myself. So that's, again, the simple logic behind consuming starvation, again, consuming lacking, or at the very least, not being fearful of this. So this is what the phrase of the Zohar says, that when there, davka, specifically when there's a weakening of the body, when a person misses a meal, or when he doesn't get enough sleep and he feels weak, so the weakness, the exposure to one's neediness also opens his heart. It enhances his soul. So the weakness of the body strengthens the soul. Now, what does the Torah want to insist on when it says that the best fast, or the strongest whip, the strongest weakening of the body is the Torah itself? Then this idea that we just conveyed from an allegory from fasting, which is very important, we fast to this very day, but after all that being said, a fast relates to a very superficial, technical aspect of who we are. So if you skip a meal, so you physically feel needy, but a person's full of himselfness, again, a person's pride, a person's self-righteousness, a person's existential sensation of lack of neediness, it doesn't sum up with his physical entity, with his physical health. All the more so if you contemplate on it deeply. So there's something very superficial about focusing on the physical attributes of all of these concepts. So a person's true sense of self-righteousness and fullness and enlightenment, how high and mighty and righteous he is, evolves much more around his sense of self-righteousness, about his opinions, the way he conceives of himself as being a very righteous person, a very enlightened person. And it has somewhat less to do with his physical stance. So when you're physically weak, I just happened to come from a hospital now, visiting a very dear person. So you go to hospitals, you see a lot of people. B'ezrat Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send all the sick people a lot of refuah, a lot of health. But when you go to hospitals, you see people that are in a physical state, and there really is more of a spiritual awakening there, or more of an acute sensitivity to the fragility of humanity. So people become more sensitive to their needs in general, and their need for Hashem, their most dire need of their dependency on their Creator. So there's more religion in a hospital. Okay, but still, that's something very technical. And in order to refine the more existential, deep, profound sense of self-righteousness and fullness, so something needs to fight up, to punch up against the deeper elements of our soul. And this is what the Ishbitzer explains in this Vort this week, that the biggest whip for a person is the simple study of Torah. And studying Torah, not even Chasidut like we're studying now, just studying an idea in the Gemara, studying just a complicated, intricate concept in Jewish philosophy or in Jewish law. Anybody who's merited in their lives to sit down in a yeshiva and study seriously one of these topics. So you know that there is first of all, there's also an immense physical effort to it. So there is that simple technical side of staying concentrated and staying up and awake, and a hard learning can really break a sweat. But more than that, there's something that a devoted study of trying to understand what Hashem wants of me, trying to again fight my initial understandings, my superficial understandings. There's something more critical about an intense study than any fast you can do or any other, again, criticism you can give yourself. Again, focused study, like an effort and focused study. That's why it's also so difficult, and so many young men and women find it so difficult to study, because the ability to challenge my opinion, challenge my sense of opinion, challenge my sense of understanding and knowing that I know anything. If you try to walk into again a class in Gemara now, you've never studied this before in your life, you're gonna feel a very frail feeling, that it's so difficult and it's so hard to challenge everything you assumed. If you study in depth, then you'll see that there's so many layers of processing that more than you gain knowledge, the process of study undermines your assumption of fullness, much, much deeper than any fast. And the deep study of Torah pivots up against one's pride more than any fast or any other practice of walking around with soleless shoes and stepping on thorns. More than any of these, again, technical practices, without being derogatory about them, but more than any of these things can soften and refine a person's fullness, the intense, in-depth study of Torah will undermine your feeling of enlightenment more than anything else. And this is what the Chazal teach us in this parasha, that the Torah, coming to the culmination of the Torah, is the strongest whip of them all. That if you put yourself, you devote yourself to an intense study, and you're willing to undermine everything you think, all your assumptions, you're willing to be critical and scrutinize all your assumptions, all your understandings, you're opened to this criticism, this sort of study, which is a very difficult feat. I teach in all sorts of places, and you see it's very difficult for people to again scrutinize and be critical about their presumptions, their assumption, what they've been assuming. And more than specific topics, it's just their assumption of knowledge. I'm talking about it myself. Every one of us is like that. So devoting ourselves to study, and not just study, to trying to understand and be able to derive what Hashem wants of us, even if it's just in the strictest law of what I should do on Shabbos in such a situation. But again, not just looking to read into it where my soul already tends, or my tendencies and my assumptions, really criticizing and scrutinizing myself and undermining all of my assumptions to be able to listen and hear what's being told. So like now I'm teaching a class. So the effort that a person can be putting into, or should be putting into listening, and seriously not noticing how much or if we're talking this allegory, how much one listening tends to read himself into what's being said and not listen truly, and being critical about that. So that effort in time is more refining and more of a whip than any fast that a person can take. So the Torah itself, the devotion to the in-depth study of Hashem's will, is what softens and refines our pride more than anything else. And not only that, if we Bezrat Hashem, this is why this is so appropriate for this time of the year, that if we devote ourselves to this, and also we can mitigate the need for any other refinement. You don't need to, chas v'shalom, nobody ever needs to go to hospital. Nobody ever has to have wars or any external superficial harshness, because the superficial harshness is just there to soften our excess pride. But if we are willing to devote ourselves and be very critical about ourselves and scrutinize our excess pride by making a real effort, which also breaks a physical sweat, but especially a psychological, mental sweat, of undermining our assumption of knowingness and fullness, that we're stopped being so full of ourselves and really devoting ourselves to this study, then we can neglect the need for any of these superficial scrutinies that we receive from reality, these knocks on our head that keep bringing us down. So if we just devote ourselves enough to what Hashem wants from us, and in lining ourselves and trying to understand, listening, and putting our own opinions aside, it's very, very difficult. An intense study of Torah. So the intense study of Torah can work in a much better way all of the meekness and loneliness that a person needs for his mental health, to open him up, to be sensitive to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, to other people's presence in life, to have a healthy mentality and healthy life. And it can do that without the need of any external superficial harshness. So as a segula, for this time of the year, this is the best time of the year to devote yourself to in-depth study of Torah. And that in-depth study, it will negate all your need for any superficial harshness in life, B'ezrat Hashem. So we'll bless ourselves and all the Jewish people in the entire world, all of the humanity, that we can all devote ourselves to diving deeply into what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from His creation. And by focusing on that, the self-scrutiny that demands will make all of the harshness of the world irrelevant, not needed anymore, and will dissipate, B'ezrat Hashem. So that's our blessing to everyone in this period of the year. B'ezrat Hashem, you shall have a happy V'kashav Tov and an easy fast. B'ezrat Hashem, Kol Tov.